And it's happening because nobody from the government has come to speak with us to see what is their position on whether to mine or not to mine.
Good evening, everyone.
So we have to continue the war against no mining.
So, a showdown in the Cockpit Country, first over what exactly constitutes the Cockpit Country and what should be done to protect the area. And there are several sides to this issue. Mining interests who want to explore, but according to them, outside rather, the Cockpit Country protected area. The government, which has started a process to determine the boundaries of the Cockpit Country protected area and insists that no decision has been made to mine in the area. Farmers and residents, many of whom say they do not believe mining interests or the government and think eventually big business will win out. And environmentalists who say they will stop at nothing to ensure that the area, all of it, is protected. Good evening, my name is Archibald Gordon. I'm your moderator of this town hall being put on by the Public Access Channel in association with the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica. The Public Access Channel is an online-based channel dedicated to ensuring that members of the public get an opportunity to discuss matters which affect their lives. We're on YouTube, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, and this evening we're streaming live on the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica's Facebook page. We're live at the Stewart Baptist Church in Trelawny. It's absolutely surrounded, it's absolutely packed rather, with people from across the parish as well as several other areas. A special welcome in particular to students from high schools in the area. Good evening. This evening we're asking, what should protection look like? To share perspectives, we have the head of the Sustainable Development Unit at the University of the West Indies, Mona, Dr. David Smith. We have independent filmmaker, writer, and linguist, Dr. Esther Figueroa, and Executive Director of the Southern Trelawny Environmental Agency, Hugh Dixon. This evening, they have 3 brief presentations from each of the panelists, and then we'll open the floor to questions and comments. Now, for those of you who are watching the debate online, whether on the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica's Facebook page, or via a link posted by our partner on the project, The Gleaner Online, please share your questions and comments online and use our hashtags Cockpit Debate, that's COCKPIT DEBATE, or hashtag PAC Jamaica, that's the name of our channel, so we can find those questions and comments and we can share them with our panelists when the floor is open for questions. So, just before we invite Dr. Figueroa, Mr. Dixon, and Dr. Smith to make their presentations in that order, why are we here today? Well, just over a year ago, Prime Minister Andrew Holness announced in Parliament that areas would be designated as the Cockpit Country protected area. The Prime Minister said Cabinet adopted the Paris-Leoai Junior 2005 boundary as the boundary of the Cockpit Country. He said this boundary will be declared and gazetted. Meanwhile, the protected area, he said, would include existing forest reserves, significant hydrological and ecological features, and cultural and heritage sites. This area comprises approximately 74,726 hectares and will be referred to as a Cockpit Country protected area and will be protected, said the Prime Minister Holness, under specific legislation as advised by the Attorney General. He said the goal of defining the boundary is to ensure forest conservation, protection of biodiversity, preservation and improvement of traditional livelihoods, and the creation of new economic opportunities from heritage, health and wellness tourism as well as ecotourism. He also said no mining would be permitted in the Cockpit Country protected area. But that plan has been the subject of skepticism because of those who dispute the boundaries proposed. Many want a much wider area to be declared as the Cockpit Country protected area. Some, for instance, wanted to include SML 173, an area of interest to those who support mining. Now, the government has undertaken what's called a ground-truthing exercise, basically trying to determine whether the proposed boundary is what exists on the ground. On August 6th this year, the Prime Minister said, quote, "Cabinet also took further steps to ensure that before any mining can be done in areas outside of and close to the Cockpit Country protected area, as defined, an environmental impact assessment must be done." He said, "We are very sensitive to the concerns being raised about the Cockpit Country protected area, and we are very sensitive to the areas surrounding and in close proximity to the Cockpit Country protected area," end quote. Which brings us to where we are today. What should protection look like, and how does one balance all the considerations and satisfy all the stakeholders? I thank you this evening for turning out to discuss this very important issue. Let's start with a perspective from Dr. Esther Figueroa. Now, Dr. Figueroa is an independent filmmaker, writer, and linguist. She has 25 years of expertise in media productions, including documentaries, educational videos, television programming, music videos, multimedia, web content, and feature film. An activist filmmaker, her work focuses on local knowledge, indigenous culture, social injustice, community empowerment, and the environment. Her work gives voice to those outside of mainstream media and aims to counter the dominant values, information, and worldviews portrayed in commercial media. Her work includes Jamaica for Sale, a feature-length documentary about the economic, environmental, and social consequences of unsustainable tourism development in Jamaica. A quick reminder, as she prepares to make her presentation, to share with you that you can share your comments and questions online by using, again, the hashtags Cockpit Debate and PAC Jamaica. Please make her welcome.
Thank you very much. Not as tall as you, Archibald. Can you fix this? Thank you very much. Before I start my presentation, on behalf of the panel, I would just like to thank very much Public Access Channel and Environmental Foundation of Jamaica for having this very important event, and for the Webb Memorial Church for hosting it, and for Stewart Town. And I want a special greeting to all the students and young people who are here, because really you are the most important people, and this is what affects you the most. What I am going to talk about is the question that was asked, whether Cockpit Country requires its own legal framework for protection. So I'm about to begin on that. Tonight we have the opportunity to begin the necessary process of thinking about and discussing what it will take to protect all of Cockpit Country. To imagine a Jamaica that is different to the one we currently live in, and in this crisis of man-made climate change, to consider the actions we need to take right now to create a livable future. It is my position that Cockpit Country requires its own exceptional legal framework, because the existing legal framework is inadequate to properly protect Cockpit Country and Cockpit Country communities. Because the governance is piecemeal, unintegrated, administered by various agencies, and subject to competing levels of jurisdiction. But more importantly, the legal framework is founded on a value system that is colonial, exploitative, and unjust. As we plan for the protection of Cockpit Country, the future of Jamaica and the planet, we must consider three things: what we value and why, As we plan for the protection of Cockpit Country, the future of Jamaica and the planet, we must consider three things: what we value and why, the place of humans in the totality of life, and the position of the individual in relation to the nation and the rulers of that nation. For example, why is the livelihood of one truck driver hauling bauxite of greater value than the livelihood of a community of farmers? Why is Jamaican soil of greater value dug up in the billions of tons and exported to North America than left in the ground to grow trees and food and to filter water that percolates into the aquifer? The lie that we have told ourselves is that human beings are superior to and apart from nature, that nature is an infinite resource to exploit in whatever way we choose, and that there is a balance that must be struck between the economy, which translates as human production and consumption, and the environment, and that the balance is always on the side of humans, no matter what the cost. But the truth is that we are embedded in nature and completely dependent on the natural world. Without air, water, and soil, we don't exist. In St. Anne, the communities of Gibraltar and Madras, who had petitioned the government of Jamaica to not allow mining in their communities, are now being mined under Special Mining Lease 172. And Minister of Mining, Robert Montague, has stated that Special Mining Lease 173, which will expand mining into Cockpit Country, will not be rescinded. This despite the fact that the environmental impact assessment has not been released for public comment, despite the fact that people living in Special Mining Lease 173, Jamaican citizens across the island and in the diaspora, have clearly said that they do not want mining to take place. So what then is the relationship between the individual, the nation, and the rulers of that nation if consistently the basic needs of the citizenry are ignored and rural Jamaicans sacrifice for the so-called greater good of the country? The Jamaican Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms guarantees Jamaicans the right to enjoy a healthy and productive environment free from the threat of injury or damage from environmental abuse and degradation of the ecological heritage. Within a rights-based legal framework, the human right to a healthy environment cannot exist without nature's right to a healthy environment. And so a parallel legal framework for rights of nature has evolved. In Bolivia in 2010, under the leadership of indigenous Bolivians who have the worldview that nature is sacred, the groundbreaking Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth and Law of Mother Earth was drafted. The law grants Mother Earth the right to life, biodiversity, water, clean air, balanced restoration, and pollution-free living. The law requires actions on the part of the government, such as transitioning to renewable energy, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, developing organic food security, restoring damaged environments, and so forth. New Zealand does not have this sort of overarching rights of nature legal framework, but as part of its restorative justice agreements with Maori, the native people of those islands, New Zealand has accepted the Maori worldview that natural bodies are our ancestors and are living beings, and have granted rights of personhood to Whanganui River, to Urewera National Park, and Mount Taranaki. The entire river, forest, and mountain have legal custodians consisting of members of Maori communities and members of the government who will have the duty to protect and represent these natural beings. Part of the question regarding the legal framework for protecting Cockpit Country is who will do the protecting. What role will the communities and advocates have in that protection? It seems to me that the best people to protect a place are those who care the most and know the most about it. For the best protection of Cockpit Country, Jamaica, and the planet, I propose the adoption of both the Bolivian Rights of Mother Earth model and the New Zealand Natural Bodies approach. The rights of Mother Earth should become the overarching legal framework that governs all aspects of policy going forward. In this way, Cockpit Country will have intrinsic value and rights, and the personhood of natural bodies approach can be incorporated into the management of the Cockpit Country. The tragedy of Jamaica is that for over 500 years, our purpose has been extraction, creating wealth for others. The wealth that was stolen from this region enriched Europe and later North America, made industrialization possible. The sugar plantations were a prototype for industrial production, and the exemplar of successful capitalism, maximum profit at minimum expense, since the laborers were enslaved. People were property, and the only value to anything was its monetary value. And so today in Jamaica, relationships are primarily transactional, and the government of Jamaica prioritizes GDP, the wealth of Jamaica's oligarchy, and staying in power over the health, well-being, and self-determination of Jamaica's people. It's time to go beyond tragedy and create an inclusive future where nature and people are protected together and where the individual is not sacrificed at the altar of the nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Figueroa. A reminder that you're watching a town hall meeting being hosted by the Public Access Channel in association with the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica. I'm your moderator for the evening, Archibald Gordon. Now, we're live at the Stewart Baptist Church in Trelawny and ready to hear from our second presenter this evening. His name is Hugh Dixon. Now, Hugh Dixon is the Executive Director of the Southern Trelawny Environmental Association. He's passionate about rural development and sustainable business development. He founded the association as well as its subsidiary, the Cockpit Country Adventure Tours, as well as started and promoted the Trelawny Yam Festival, Jamaica's first agri-tourism and food festival. Mr. Dixon says his objective is to expand job opportunities in rural Jamaica and the Cockpit Country region in particular by creating alternative livelihood opportunities for young people in his buffer zone communities. He's also said he wants to see more people visiting the Cockpit Country to experience its unique landscape and help conserve and support its sustainable development. Please make him welcome.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me use the quick opportunity to thank the Public Access Broadcasting, the EFJ, and the Stewart Baptist Church for having this happening here this evening. And let me also say a big welcome to the students and participants in this evening's activity. My presentation really is one that is aimed at saying we should at all costs protect Cockpit Country from any kind of degradation because of what it represents. In brief, the Cockpit Country is a landscape that has been formed over an extended period of time, and by virtue of its weathering, it has become a very interesting place for the life forms that have occupied it since until today. Critical among them, yes, is the life form. And we are familiar with the slave trade and the kind of occupation that took place in Jamaica and the relationships between the different human groups that were here. But we get to a point where we are now at the stage where the occupation of the space is providing livelihoods for us and for the nation, and it holds the potential for quite a bit more in terms of sustainable development and human occupation. And I think it's important to consider protecting it for what it currently represents rather than destroying it to meet the interests of other people. In that regard, I think the protection of the Cockpit Country must look at what are the three main components of Cockpit Country. There is a core, which is a hard forest of conical hills in the center. And it has a ring road going around it. And the communities are pretty well known. I drove past many of them coming down to get to this location from Albertown, and it goes all the way to Oxford and out to Magotty, up to Maroon Town, out to Springvale, and all the way along the northern fault line to Jacksontown. And there's a ring road. Within there are about 55 communities in there. But there's an outer reach of Cockpit Country in Barnstable, Madras, and there are other communities that are within. Ladies and gentlemen, these people have occupied this space, and the occupation is served by the nature of the landscape, a landscape that has been formed by and defined by the air quality, the soil, the water, the flora, the fauna, the people, and the cast limestone topography that makes up the base or the platform on which it is. The resources within there are several. And the one that has the power brokers behind it and want to extract it to the degradation and the disenfranchisement of the rest of us is bauxite. And ultimately, there will be an interest in mining the limestone. And the white limestone of the Cockpit Country is the most valuable white limestone in the world. So we are taking an interest in the bauxite at this point, but the further interest will be in the limestone after we've removed the soil. We think that in moving the soil, you also remove the potential livelihoods. You move the existing livelihoods for the communities that operate in those 55 communities, which number about 60,000 people living there. If you imagine it, you can recognize that that means that they will have to be dislocated and find their way of life elsewhere. And I must say it very firmly that this habit of dislocating Jamaicans from their communities has been happening for 60 years since we've been mining bauxite in Jamaica. And because of the 1947 law that is still on the books called the Mining Act, that none of our elected representatives have taken the time to investigate, it's still on the books and it still protects them. What it means is that you only own 6 inches of topsoil and the rest below is owned by the state and owned by the mining entities that take it out. So there is an injustice in the way the law is structured and in the way that those who will elect stay in power to protect it for those who are not even living here. As a result, I think that we need to look differently. And I think that the protection must represent looking at the critical possibilities going forward. In 2 minutes, let me share some of them with you. Ladies and gentlemen, there's medical marijuana. And I'm using that term in this church so that the spirits are not disengaged from my comments. Secondly, is eco, community, and cultural tourism, where people want to come and see and experience the life that we live there. Yes? There are rare species of plants, endemic species of plants, and why shouldn't we look at a herbarium? Educational tours, identifying the species, marking them, investigating in their medical and active medical components that creates a pharmaceutical industry for us. Expanding the agricultural production on one of the most fertile soils and upgrading that agriculture to value added so that we get more production out of the same space, but we're creating value added. Using the existing housing stock in those 55 communities with 55,000 roughly people, rather than building hotels in the mangroves, use our spare rooms with Airbnb to host people in these communities at no additional cost. There's an amazing maroon heritage Because along this cockpit country, the Maroons fought against the British successfully and won their freedom that we experience today. And there are many people who would love to come and experience their lifestyle, share with them, stay in their communities and understand that struggle that has brought us to where we are. And as I wind up, my brothers and sisters, I suggest we protect the cockpit country to preserve its water, its heritage, and by so doing, protect it in a way that we have three phases. The core, which is protected from any activity. The transition zone, which is where we live, the 55,000 people and have to survive, that we protect it differently so we can have economic engagement in that area. And we have a buffer on the outside, regulated to prevent mining and any destructive activity from coming within. And if we can get that, we can have prosperity moving forward into the future for the generations to come. And I ask you to consider it and give it thought and suggest it to our leaders as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Our next presenter is Dr. David Smith. Dr. Smith is the coordinator of the Institute for Sustainable Development and the director of the Center for Environmental Management. He's also coordinator of the University Consortium of Small Island States and Caribbean coordinator of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Dr. Smith has many years of experience in academia, civil society, the private sector, and the United Nations, focusing on sustainable development, biodiversity conservation, climate change, and disaster risk reduction. He initiated Jamaica's first Debt for Nature swap and played a key role in establishing the Jamaica's National Parks Trust Fund and the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica, and they are major sponsors today. Please make Dr. Smith welcome.
Glad to be here. In 2015, Jamaica and the rest of the countries in the world in New York agreed that they were going to try to eliminate poverty in the world, and they all agreed to pursue something called the Sustainable Development Goals. And they said that in 15 years from 2015, they would be eliminating poverty around the world and making sure that people had access to food and education, and that men and women would be equal and boys and girls would have equal opportunities and so on and so forth. One of the things that's very important about that kind of development is that you can't just go and pursue economic growth and then fix the environment later. And this has been said at a recent report that was tabled at the United Nations in September. Many countries have done that. Jamaica can't afford to, because we're a small island and we only have a few resources. Two of those resources, the Cockpit Country and the Blue Mountains, are so important that they are part of a worldwide study which said these are the 200 most important places in the world for plants. Cockpit Country and Blue Mountains was on that list of 200. Which means that if you guys are protecting the Cockpit Country, you have a very important responsibility, not just to protect it for your own livelihoods, but also for the rest of the world. Because there are plenty of things found in the Cockpit Country that are not found anywhere else on the planet. I want to talk, though, and I want us to imagine the water. Why? Because despite anything, scientists haven't figured out a substitute for water. And I know all of you can relate to water in one way or another. But because of the way we tend to relate to natural resources, I think that maybe, even though we recognize that people in this church are on the front line of protecting and managing the water in the Cockpit Country, maybe you sometimes feel that you're the only people who are there on on the front line and the only people who are interested in the water from the Cockpit Country. So I just want you to remind yourselves that pretty much every hotel in Montego Bay gets its water either from Great River or Montego River. That comes out of the Cockpit Country. The hotels that are in Falmouth, the rafting on the Martha Brae, that water comes from the Cockpit Country. The hydroelectric plant that the JPSCO runs from Rio Bueno's water comes from where? Okay, so what does that mean? That means that JPSCO is your ally. JPSCO has a very strong interest in making sure that the water resources from the Cockpit Country continue to flow and continue to flow in the way that they've flowed for many, many years, so they can sell electricity to their clients. And those people who use the electricity also have an interest in making sure that the water continues to flow. You may also want to remind Appleton, and I'm sure they're fully aware, that the water that comes out of the Black River comes from the Cockpit Country. The people who run YS Falls, the fishermen who fish at the bottom end of Black River, who fish all the way up and catch shrimp in middle quarters and sell, that water comes from Cockpit Country. So Cockpit Country is not just, even though you guys are extremely important, not just about those of you who are farming here and managing here and living here and have been living here for many years. You have an awful lot of other people worldwide who are interested in the animals and plants here, but also throughout Western Jamaica, whose livelihoods depend on the resources and the landscape which you manage and protect. So if you are concerned about the water, remember that they are concerned too and should be your allies. They have an interest in the water as well. We've been talking about protection and its importance. I think we all agree it's important. I just want to finish up by saying a few things about the practical aspects of actually trying to protect something. I used to be involved in setting up the Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park, and we were able to protect that. Laws in this country are very, very complex. There are a couple of things that we need to bear in mind. One is that it's going to be vital for the country to re-examine the Mining Act, which is something really old. It was done 2 years after the Second World War, 1947, when we hadn't even understood the environment or what mining could do to our natural resources. It's in desperate need of being brought into the 21st century. And we need to look at that, and we need to prevail on our government and our elected officials to fix the Mining Act, to redraft it and fix it. Why? Because, according to our mining minister, right now, almost every square inch of Jamaica is under a prospecting license for some kind of mineral. Every square inch. The law is written in such a way that it says that there are some places which you cannot mine unless the Commissioner of Mines allows you to. So in reality, there is nowhere in Jamaica where you cannot mine if the Commissioner of Mines allows you to. That law needs to be changed. Not just because of the Cockpit Country, but because every square inch, almost, of Jamaica is under a prospecting license. So it may be bauxite today, but it could be gold, or quartz, or something tomorrow. So we need to prevail on that. Second part now. Yes, the Prime Minister has said that he wants to declare a protected area for the Cockpit Country. That's useful and it's nice, but if laws don't have regulations, they mean nothing. And there are no regulations for a protected area in this country, whether it be Cockpit Country or any of the other protected areas that have been declared. So we must also make sure that regulations are written. My suggestion is, though, in the meantime, let's make sure that the Forest Act has the power that it's supposed to have and that the Forestry Department has the budget it's supposed to have to do its work to protect the core areas which are already forest reserves. And let's make sure that that area, Paris-Hawaii boundary, that is going to be made a protected area becomes a national park, because national park legislation has regulations and you can stop people from doing things. And it doesn't make sense just passing a law if the law doesn't have regulations, teeth, penalties, and so on and so forth. It's just a PR gesture if it doesn't have regulations. So, I think I'll leave you with that. I agree that there should be different types of protection for the core, for the buffer, and for that transition zone. The problem I have is that it takes us a long, long time to develop legislation in this country. When I was much, much younger and my hair was black, and I didn't have this belly, in 1992 I recommended to the government that the Cockpit Country should have been declared a national park. That was 1992. Goodbye.
So we are now opening the floor to questions, to comments. There is a microphone there to the, what is it? This is my left? Yes, good, that's my left. It's to the right of the audience, if you're approaching it from this direction. So we are opening the floor to questions, to comments. I'm asking you to remember as well the particular areas of expertise of the panel who's here, members of who have joined us to share their comments this evening, to share their perspectives. But if I may, I would like to ask a question to start the debate off, and it surrounds where the boundary should be. Because one of the central issues here is the question of there being several different boundaries. If each of you could in turn take that question and answer that question, where should the boundary be? That's the first question. Let's start with you, Dr. Smith. You can sit where you are. Yeah, madam.
I think there's maybe a little more focus on the boundaries than we need to be careful with that. Two things. One is that there are things outside the boundaries that will also need to be protected. So we should be wary of trying to make the boundary incorporate everything that we would like to protect. So for example, let's take, I don't know, Rio Bueno, for example. What is important if we are going to think about mining in Rio Bueno is not whether it's part of the Cockpit Country or not. It's what damage are you going to do to the Rio Bueno by mining there? And can we stack that up against the benefits and what's going on there already? So, back to your original question, boundaries. We have one good boundary which I think might protect the most important things, which is the boundary where they're going to put a protected area, but as I've said, probably better to put a national park because it will have regulations that can do stuff. Not perfect, but we move on. We then need to look at the rest of what is valuable. Where are people living? That's important, and there need to be ways of regulating and managing the natural resources where people already are. That's a completely different kind of setup from what you would do in the core area. And so that may have quite different kinds of boundaries. Similarly, this idea of a buffer zone to be able to make sure that there's still breathing space for the people who live in the transition zone, that's important as well. But I don't know for sure, and my colleagues might disagree with me, that this precise nature of where those boundaries are is as important as the kind of management that takes place inside those zones. And I'm very concerned that we might feel that once we set a boundary, that the problem is solved, and it's not.
I'm seeing someone on the floor, but if we could just have one more comment and then come to the floor first.
Yes, okay.
I think there is benefit in considering the Cockpit Country stakeholders boundary, and also bearing in mind a buffer, a transition zone, and a core.
That would be the widest boundary, the Cockpit Country
The
stakeholders
Cockpit Country
boundary.
stakeholders boundary. And my idea of protection is you look at the things you want to keep out of happening there, and you look at the kinds of inclusions that you can have in the different areas of Cockpit Country. So for example, I would say loudly, no mining in Cockpit Country stakeholders boundary. Then within that buffer zone, we say, listen, we can do some zonation to determine some of the things that are important and the regulations you would have in that particular area. When you come into the transition zone, you're looking at sustainability. You're looking at human existence, human welfare, livelihood. What are the things you're going to do to ensure that our agriculture, our producers of agriculture, or tourism is conducted in a sustainable way, so you don't have carbon footprints that will interfere with associated industry or anything that would affect emissions. And then in the core, you're saying, listen, this is the center, the rugged interior. We don't want too much trafficking in here. We may allow some research to be done so we can better understand the nature of the watershed and the landscape. But for the most part, we are keeping human activity out of there. So you regulate from the out in, and you keep out what you don't want at all because it's destructive, and you work progressively up, and you get that legislated in the Parliament of Jamaica, protected by our independent elected representatives there, so that they get busy doing some work for a change rather than just hitting the bench every day like that.
Dr. Figueroa, let's just take the question from the floor first and then come back to you on that issue.
Panel, the audience here, my name is Graham McDonough, commonly known as Archibald Red on Facebook. Mr. Dixon, you and I had a conversation before. But seeing that we have students in the room here and a lot of people my age and above, our problem is not being focused on enough. We have 6 inches of dirt and every square inch of Jamaica is under a mining act. We are not a liberated people. We have a quota farm that's been in existence since 1662, right? It has changed several times along the way, but all that had been included to it in 1962 is out of many, one people. We have a colonial system that embraces a Westminster form of governance by 2 political parties that were given a constitution by the Privy Council. Our so-called heroes, that is what they brought back to the island. Constitution given to us by that entrenched various different offices and positions in there, where the only thing that is not in the Constitution is the rights of the people. We don't have no voice in Parliament. So for us to continuously be, like sycophants, asking them to do what we know they should have been doing. And as you well stated, since the Mining Act, we've been moving around for 60 years. Our solution is only one thing. There has been the 2 political parties that will not change the system. I, for one, I speak total liberation. As far as I'm concerned, the whole of Jamaica is Cockpit Country. That's as far as I am concerned, right? So if we want to protect anything, we need to protect the whole island. And we cannot be just going after one little area, one little section, while the Parliament is going to tell us that we have no say-so. And I think it's full time now that we, the people, truly try to really build upon a 3rd political party to remove them out of Parliament, right? And that's the only way we're going to do it. That is the only way we are going to be able to see any future. For these students right here, every year we have children coming out of our high school, 40,000 of them. We don't have any factories. Where are they going to work? We turn the nation into a nation of consumers, right? Everything coming out of a container right there. So John, Tom, and Mary, everybody up on the street sell chin goods. And that is what them turn us right into back, the same, the crowd bandage, same way. And it is not acceptable to me and my future, right? I am 58 years old. I left this country twice. And I left the second time to really learn what needs to be done. Many of us are not aware of what needs to be done. I, myself, has run as a candidate in the 2016 general election as an independent. Not because I really wanted to show myself, but I needed to know the process so that I can encourage you and you to do the same thing. It's the only way we can get 63 people credible enough to really stand in an election to vote them out. And there's more than enough. Out of 2.7 million people, we can't find 63 credible people to stand up and represent every constituency. You have the United Independence Congress that has just been registered. And from my perspective, Joseph Patterson supports the things that I support. And any party that will support the liberation of this island from out of the colonial system, I will support it. And it's incumbent that all of us, that we should support that party too. It's the only way we are going to become our own decision makers. It's the only way we are going to take our future into our own hands. Their vision of 2030 does not include the population, They have given away one stretch of the island from the north, from the south to the north to the Chinese. And both sides of that roadside is there geared for development. It's no business with me and you. We're not say so in that. We're not say so in nothing with them do. And it's full time now we start to look towards making ourselves represent our cause. And stop asking these people who we put in there. The parliamentarians do not have a job description. They don't have a job description. Right? They do anything they want. A guy wants more pay. And minimum wage is where it is right now. Them calling for public discussion for minimum wage. And your boss say you get 300,000, you get gifts, you get all kind of things. And you say you want more pay because you want to and give people money. We want jobs, we want work, we want development. We don't want a politician to come and give you nothing. And then if you stop, take it from them. You understand me?
Sorry, I hear a lot of passion there. We just want to get in a couple quick comments. A couple of important issues there, but before I get to some of them, I just wanted to answer the question that we raised earlier, Dr. Figueroa. What should the boundary be? That was the question first, and I'll get to some of these issues after.
One.
I think I agree with David that the whole boundary issue can turn into a fetish, and that while we're concentrating on issues of the boundary, we're missing the larger issues of governance that this gentleman has just raised. And in terms of protecting, it's about not just Cockpit Country, it's about all of Jamaica. It's about the relationship, as I said before, between the individual, the nation, and the rulers of the nation, and the laws that have to do with that. In terms of protecting Cockpit Country, we have to understand actually, we talk about the core and the buffer zone and the et cetera, but actually Cockpit Country is extremely specific and extremely intricate. And so you have to understand the different parts of Cockpit Country to really protect it. And so I think we get caught up in these discussions of boundaries when in fact we need to understand the interconnectivity of the systems. We need to really understand what is there and how to protect it, community by community, place by place. So I think that the focus on the boundaries is really not the issue at all.
Dr. Figueroa, you said something earlier. You shared Bolivia experience. So if we can bring in some folks from Facebook, one of the questions here from Sullivan on Facebook is, how does that model work in Jamaica? What's Bolivia's experience?
What Bolivia's experience is that they just had a coup. They were just overthrown by the interests of mining in Canada, the interests of mining in Germany and the European Union, and the interest of United States to make sure that nothing ever changes in this region. But before the coup, they did manage to actually have the involvement of people who had never been who had been part of the genocide and the conquest of the entire Americas, which is the indigenous people had never had a position in government or a say, and they were able to change the ideology behind it, which is what we need to do. You cannot just simply talk about protection or laws without actually changing the thinking, the feeling, the understanding behind it. So in Bolivia, they were able to actually do things like stop the privatization of water. They were able to improve the living standards of up to 40% or more of the population. They were able to do many, many things while protecting in many ways the environment. It was not total protected because they were continuing to do extractive industries, but it was a system that we need to look at and discuss because it goes beyond simple notions of this law or that law, but has a completely different worldview of our place in the cosmos.
We're going to get to a second question from the floor, but two quick comments from folks online. Stacey Borgas saying, the Cockpit Country is the heart of Jamaica. If we remove our heart, we will slowly die. And Jackie Bin saying, burn up the law. To you, sir, on the floor.
All right. Greetings, audience, and Dr. Smith, Dr. Figueroa, I want to see your movie. Greetings, and Mr. Dixon. I take another view on this, a little different. We are still working on emancipation. I don't think we had finished emancipation. And what I understand about that is that the people who were brought here were left on the land. There were no provisions to take them off the land, so they had to be here. So it's a term, family land. So the people who were left here, I think in part of emancipation, the Baptist church was very central in having emancipation done. And a part of that was saying it's family land because as Africans, we were tied to the land. Our navel strings are buried there. We've come so far and forgot about other things, and now we're talking about buffer zones and boundary. No one has the right to take our land away, period. So maybe we should really look at what the original intent of the Baptist church wanted, or the original intent of emancipation. And that were the people who's left here. And for the first time, this is the first generation who has the opportunity to make big money out of Jamaica. Slave masters made huge money. I've seen what they built. I've seen it all over Scotland, London, and everywhere. They've done it. It is time now for us to create big money from what is here. I noticed in the flyer it spoke about big money. And that's funny. We are the big money. All we have to do is do the work. So they brought us here. We did the work, and we've done that. I agree with everything you said so far, the panel, in terms of the boundaries and so forth. But I like the legal aspect of this. There's a thing where it comes straight from the Bible, and it's called ill-gotten gain. And that means you're not allowed to sell something which you've stolen. Maybe we should look at the original law, what brought us here in the first place. I'll sit down, maybe I'll ask another question later.
A question from Jones. Thank you, sir. A question from Jones on Facebook to Dr. Smith. He says, parks cost money. How will you fund it?
Yes, they cost money. they've been funded in different ways. The Blue Mountain Park does a lot of work with the communities around it. They are able to get grants from different places. Some aspects of what they do has to do just with recreation and tourism, and that's funded by people paying user fees. So if you're going to climb to Blue Mountain Peak and you want to stay at the cottages halfway up in Penline Castle, and you want to be able to get water and so on and so forth, there's a fee you pay. That fee helps to pay the salaries of the rangers, it helps to maintain the cabins, it helps to maintain the trail and so on. So yes, everything costs money. What we need to do is make sure that we are being able to capture that, and we can capture it in different ways. We can find ways of not just the direct users, but also people who are using water, for example, are the hotels that make a lot of money from tourism in Montego Bay paying to protect the source of the water that they use? Is the JPS paying to protect the source of the water it uses? Are we doing what we call, or what economists call, paying for ecosystem services? Water is an ecosystem service, somebody has to pay for it. There's no point in people protecting and having to maybe earn less than you might otherwise if other people are getting the profit from that and you are not. So there is a project right now for the Yalis and Hope rivers, which is looking at charging the people who use the water that comes from those rivers, taking that money, putting it into a fund that puts trees back on the hillside and works with the farmers in the area of the watershed to make sure that there are sustainable agricultural practices. That's the sort of thing that we need to see.
Hugh Dixon, that same question to you.
The business of a park is okay. I think there are enough models globally to look at as examples. But I think one of the things that we don't do enough is do critical local thinking. That's where we vision what we want as a people and see how we adopt what there is out there locally. It calls for a level of vision, it calls for some amount of brainstorming. But one of the things that is important is that there are a lot of resources here in place already. And if we do low-cost analysis, we will find that we have a lot that can be converted to get sustainable development, rather than thinking we have to go borrow or go and beg from outside, and the dictates as to how you structure your park or your development is determined outside. And I think that's where I want to impress, certainly on this gathering, our students, that we need to break ranks with some of the colonial past by thinking creatively now and looking at what we want with this landscape, what we want with the externalities that are affecting us, and on that basis, we can craft something that is driven, guided by external models, but created and is indigenously ours. And that's pretty simple, I think, and we are practicing some here already. So in terms of just seeing money as this thing that is a stumbling block, it's not necessarily the start point of our analysis and our visioning process to get it in place.
Question on the floor.
Yes, good evening, everybody. We have been talking about lots of things to do with the Cockpit Country. The argument about the conservation of Cockpit Country, why it is so critical now, is because of the threat, the imminent threat of bauxite mining, which everybody who lives here understands how destructive this industry is. So, you know, we're talking about all the wonderful things that the Cockpit Country represents and how going forward, you know, we should be protecting it. But a lot of things come down to money. You know, we think about the big economic argument that our own government is making to say that mining should be allowed and it is so important for the economy. But what we have never done is to actually look at the economic benefits of preserving the cockpit country and all the things, all the values. Have we ever added up the cost of the water, the farming, the food production, the environmental services, the forests, the insects? And I want to just focus a little bit on the other economic alternative that hasn't much been mentioned tonight, and that is tourism. A lot of people in the Stewart town area have seen me over the last 15 years walking around with binoculars and trailing a few people, because the birds of the cockpit country are worth millions and millions of foreign exchange. I do not advertise my services, and I use all of my earnings to support a wildlife rescue facility that I run in Runaway Bay, which gets no government support and no big donor support either. So, but there is such an opportunity for the young people to learn about, to know about their natural heritage and to capitalize on that by sharing it with the people who would like to come here to know about the cockpit country. I'm a bird person. People call me Birdie here. But I also know the history. I know the architecture. I love and know many of the people who know me, and it is an authentic, irreplaceable, and extremely valuable resource. Simply the rural life and the environment of these villages and communities within the cockpit country core and in the outskirts. And my heart just breaks to think that the bulldozers and the backhoes could come in and dig out the fields, the farming fields that are all around here, and with the ultimate impact of either forcing farmers to lose their livelihood or to begin to move up the hills and cut down the forests on the hills so that they can plant something. So the issue of protecting the cockpit country has to do with governance, with our environmental quality, with the culture and heritage of this area, and with the economic opportunities that preserving and protecting the authentic way of life for Jamaica will offer in terms of tourism and sustainable production, food production. Those are the two big things for me, because if we don't have sustainable food production and we don't have the forests and the water, what is Jamaica? I mean, what is being sold as tourism for Jamaica? It could happen anywhere in any other place, but this is the real Jamaica. This is one of the reasons we need to protect the cockpit country.
I hear a lot of support for those comments, but in particular for farmers. I'm not hearing from farmers, members of the community, students. Remember, there's a microphone here. Please share your comments. Please come up and let us know what you think and ask questions as well. Somebody on the floor.
Okay, I'm Tamara Case, and I wanted to ask government. I recognize that the government has pulled out monies in the name of Cockpit Country, not the Cockpit Country protected area. And if there are monies to be had, I heard Mr. Dixon saying, well, you don't want to maybe be going cap in hand. But since we have given so much to the world, and they are giving back money in the name of climate change, because I saw where the Prime Minister has been going around the world basically in the name of climate change, and he being the poster child for climate change. I don't know why, but if there are monies to be had, and as I said, the government has pulled down those monies, how can we pull down more of those monies and boot the bauxite out of it and use those monies in the right way in Cockpit Country? Is there a way to pull down those monies from the rest of the world? That's what I want to know.
There's a Green Climate Fund, and that has come out of, and I think David could add some more to it. But there's a lot of money that is been put out there for the response to the impacts of climate change. And I know that Jamaica is courting a lot of those funds. When it converts from the euros or the US dollar to 140 Jamaican, it does really make for a lot of money. I think there are two things in responding to your question. One is we need to become more organized as groups in our respective communities, maybe in our schools, so that we can begin the critical thinking as to where is it we want to go, so you can projectize that vision and as a result access some of those funds that will be able to allow you to have more control of the process going forward in implementing what we want to see. I think also it is critical to have a specific expertise in monitoring what you do, because these entities that are making funds available are going to be looking if you are in fact delivering on what you say. And that maybe is where I have my greatest concern about the state, because we are not as a people allowed to see where their funding received goes. We don't even see very much of where our tax dollar goes, and therefore it is critical for us to begin a process of copiously looking at those who represent to ensure that their stewardship affects those development possibilities going into the future.
Dr. Smith?
Yeah, you're quite right. Guyana was able to get money from Norway and other countries to protect its rainforest because it's of value to the world. There is no theoretical reason why Jamaica cannot do that for the Cockpit Country. It will boil down partly to organization, partly to be able to write the documents and so on and so forth, and come up with good ideas that make sense. But we already have a good case. As I said before, it's one of the 200 most important sites in the world for plant biological diversity. As I'm sure many of you know, there are plants and animals found in the Cockpit Country that you can't find anywhere else in the world, not even in other parts of Jamaica. So yes, it's possible, and yes, it should be done. And we should be working with non-government organizations, with academic places, the University of the West Indies and other universities, and government to get that money and bring it to Jamaica, because there are plenty of other people in the rest of the world doing very similar things there. Not all of them have what we have, but we need to do the work. Yeah.
Dr. Smith, someone's asking you to explain the debt swap a little bit more, and would this be an option here?
It's possible. The debt swap that we did was back in the 90s when I had the black hair and less tummy. And what we did was, because Jamaica had a lot of money that it owed commercial banks around the world and was not able to pay it off as well as it should have been able to, what that meant was that there was a market for Jamaican debt. In other words, we owed people money but we weren't paying, but other people with more money would buy that debt and we'd owe them the debt instead. The way that worked was that you could then say, well, instead of you paying us the money that you owe, put that money into protecting nature, and we will count that against the debts that you owe. And so money was donated, and we were able to buy Jamaican debt and convert that so Jamaica no longer owed that money. And what happened was that money was used to pay the salaries of the rangers who worked in the Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park, the rangers who worked in the Montego Bay Marine Park. Also, that's how the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica was set up. This was money that the Jamaican government owed the American government. And what the American government said was, out of the money you owe us, we'll forgive some of the debt, but the rest of it, instead of paying us, put that money into a fund, and that money should be used to protect the environment, to look at the welfare of children, and they had about 12 different things that had to do with environmental issues that they said the money must go to. And so that's how the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica was set up, with about maybe $20 million in the beginning, and then other swaps that took place later on. And that's why they're able to sponsor this particular event, and also why over the last 20-odd years, they've been able to give money to non-government organizations to do important work in protecting the environment of Jamaica.
Question on the floor.
Good evening. My name is Leon Jackson. To the panelists, I think you're preaching to the converted, except for Prime Minister Andrew Holness and the Minister Montague. The Prime Minister says no mining, but it's a trick way of destroying what we have, because he, well, not in person, but he has had a different boundary drawn from the original. And when he says no mining, that boundary is the one that he has drawn. Now, we know that it is done to protect interest of something else or somebody else. I want you to tell me, where do you go from here when we hear the minister says this 173 lease will not be revoked? Because you're telling us what most of us hear, but we have a few steps more to go. How can we convince Minister Montague? Because I don't believe that when he said it is not going to be reviewed, he believes it, but he's in a position where he has to please his masters.
I think you're quite right. I won't agree with absolutely everything you said, but I agree with most of what you said. But there's a key thing that is missing here. When the Minister of Mining says that mining contributes 2.8% of GDP in whatever year it was that it did that, it's a bit like if you ran a shop and you sold $500 worth of goods, and at the end of the week you said you had $500. Well, if you run a shop, you realize that that's not true, because you sold for $500, but you still have to pay for the stock that you sold. So the money you made is not $500, it's $500 minus the cost of the goods that you sold. So what the minister is saying is that if we ignore the actual external costs of mining, then yes, it earns 2.8% of GDP. But you can't run a business that way, and you can't run a country that way either. So it's like Wendy said, we have to count the costs and the benefits. Yes, there is a benefit or a gross profit of 2.8% of GDP, but we haven't counted the costs yet, so we don't know how much money mining has actually earned for the country. And one of the problems is that unless we actually get some good quality economists to look at it, we're always going to be thinking that we're earning all this money, when in actual fact, that shopkeeper who made $500 could have spent $490 buying the stock that they sold, in which case they'd have earned how much? $10. So yes, we have earned 2.8% of GDP, but how much did it cost to do that? And if we are going to mine a new area, what will it cost? For the people who, for example, already use the water to run a hydro station or a tourism attraction on the Rio Bueno, or who provide the water from that river to the public water supply, would the miner be prepared to put down a bond that says, I guarantee that my mining is a good operation, but just in case I make a mistake, here is the cost of all those things, and I've put the money down, so just in case something goes wrong, those millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars will come out of my pocket and go to compensate all the people who I have wronged. Mining doesn't do that at the moment because mining operates under a law that was put in place 2 years after World War II. How many people here remember World War II? How many people here were alive during World War II? Right. World has changed since then. We have computers, we have better cars, we have the internet, we have all kinds of things that we never had in 1947, including a much better understanding of how the world works and how the natural world works. So we must change the law that allows an operation to not take into account not just the economic, but also the social costs. Bear in mind that the law allows for mining anywhere, and almost every inch of Jamaica, according to the minister, is under a prospecting license. So yes, we need to count the cost and the benefit, do the maths, and then afterwards see whether or not mining is still that good. Maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. And my suspicion is, since we've never counted the real cost, we really need to look at mining in a slightly different or completely different way from the way we've looked at it so far. Yes, it's produced great benefits, but we also need to, now we understand, and particularly in the case of Cockpit Country, we must make sure we have the benefits stacked up against the costs.
There's a question on the floor, but we'll get to that question. You see, the thing is, Dr. Smith, on the face of it though, a lot of people are employed in the sector. So how do you counter that kind of criticism from people who say, yeah, I get the concerns, but at the same time, there are people in actual jobs?
Of course there are. That's why we need the actual evidence. You say a lot of people are employed. Let's write down exactly how many people are employed and what kind of jobs. Let's write down how many people stand to lose, exactly how much, how many farmers, and how much produce gets lost. We need to do a proper accounting. You wouldn't give somebody money if you were a bank. If somebody walks in and says, I'd like to borrow some money, a lot of it, and I think I can do a lot of good with it. Nobody would lend anybody that money. You have to have the numbers, you have to have the evidence. We cannot develop this country without evidence. And right now we do not have the evidence that mining is doing a great job or a bad job. We must collect that evidence.
Hugh Dixon, you wanted to come in on this.
I just want to add quickly to that, because we are lauding gross domestic product as a index of development. It's gross. So if you're always getting that figure, you're not looking at the net effect, the net costs. Yes? And in bauxite, the way the laws of the bauxite mining or the leases are determined, you actually begin or should have to pay out the costs maybe 3 years after you have dug it out. So when you get the gross figures, the costs come way down the line, like rehabilitation and getting back the sites to the condition that they're supposed to be at. To begin with, you can't get them back there. But there are some other things that are critical to us and have affected our Jamaican population, or health. Yes? The number of respiratory illnesses that our people have has not been accounted. It is to be accounted against bauxite. The amount of crime in pockets of Jamaica because people have no employment because the soil is removed and their opportunity is no longer there has to be computed against bauxite. But let me leave you quickly with this, particularly the students. Start to think of a term in economics called the opportunity cost. That is, if you looked at all the things that I mentioned that are possibilities going forward, that would be economic possibilities for us. And the fact that all of them are killed once you take out the soil out of the ground, then you start to begin to see the destructive nature of the industry. And it is critical to look at that, because you may be lauding and applauding the GDP. And if it's just 2%, my dear brothers and sisters, it's not contributing very much to begin with. And when you look at the opportunity cost that is lost, you then begin to see the real figures showing up for you. So it's just complementing what David just mentioned, and I think it's a point of reference for all of us to take this conversation going forward.
Question on the floor. Oh, quick comment and a question.
In addition to what has been said, the actual growth that was mentioned by the government was actually not bauxite, it was alumina. It was because Alpart, for a little over a year, was back online. Alpart is now closed. And we need to realize the vulnerable and volatile nature of the industry. So you cannot bank. All the things that David said, all the things that Hugh said are absolutely correct. But digging up billions of tons of Jamaican soil and sending it away is insane and suicidal. And what was actually GDP, there have been many, many studies that show that GDP is not the thing to be looking at, that we need to develop other indices and other measurements. But beyond that, the fact is that it was alumina production because Alpart came online and Alpart is now closed.
Question on the floor.
Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, I want to ask this question to Mr. Prime Minister.
We invited him, he couldn't make it.
Okay. I have been hearing about boundary, our boundaries. From the day I was born, I know that the Lord created the earth. And I don't think he created any boundaries. So I want to ask the question to Mr. Prime Minister, where do he comes up with, the government and whole, where do they come with boundaries? Where these boundaries come from? That's what I would love to know. I want to know where these boundaries come from. Next. I grew up as a little girl, become a big woman now. I am from the heart of the Cockpit Country in Alps, Little Alps. And growing up, we didn't have much. But our parents, in their poor state, they used the soil as our provisions. Yeah? When our parents could not plant, get so much to plant, they have a place they call Old Yam Bush. My father always, when he don't have enough to plant, he could go to the Old Yam Bush, and they're still doing it now. Go to the old yam bush and he dug all of those old yams out of the hills and bring them home. If we don't even have fish to eat with those yams, when they cook those yams and give to us as children, they're nicer than even without fish. I'm telling you. Especially the St. Vincent, nice. There is this yam they call imba, gashi. When I was growing up, I heard they said that imba, touch me, Lord. Imba is hard to dug, hard to dig. I remember when I was a little girl, come home from school, and you know we have nothing to eat then. Just above our house, I went up there and I saw a imba root. And I tried to dig that imba. And it goes all the way in under the earth, all the way in, and I keep digging until I come up with food. And I could go and roast it and heat and fill my stomach. The gashi, I heard that the gashi is medicine. When we eat it, it helps to purge our blood. That's what our parents tell us. And I eat a lot of that. And I'm telling you, as big and old as I am, I don't visit the doctor. I only go to doctor because of health and to know what is really happening to me, of health purpose. But I don't go to doctor for any ailment. Thank God. Yeah. There's so much. In Alps, there are so many wild ackee trees. You notice people selling ackee now, and people gravitate to ackees. We have so many ackee trees in Alps, where when they bear, everybody, even if you sitting on the platform, come to Alps and you want ackee free of cost, when it bear, you can get it. Yeah? Tangerine, just last week or 2 weeks back, this tangerine finish. When those tangerine trees bear, Mr. Prime Minister, they can't even come to perfection good enough. The children gravitate to these tangerines. I remember one Sunday I was going home from church, and when my home is on a hill, and when I watched these little children going up before me, I was wondering, where are they going? And when I realized the children let them leave all the way from down at the road and go up on Femi Hill, gone to the tangerine trees to pick those tangerine. When you're looking at some of them pocket full, all I said to them is that they are there. Let them come to perfection. When they come to perfection, you can get a lot of tangerine to eat. Don't pick them off young. Make them come to perfection. They are there. You can have it. And saying this to say, there's so much. Saying this to say to you, Mr. Prime Minister, when you, the government, think of coming to us to mine out our cockpit country, how on earth our little children is going to survive? Fear. I'm really, really full and disturbed. Yes, I am disturbed because when I look back on our children and children to come, how they have free will, running up and down, picking all the fruits out there, nobody to charge them. Them pick free, them eat free. When you come with the tragedy, come to mine out our cockpit country and mine out Jamaica, finish away with Jamaica, how are we going to survive? I would like to know. It is piercing me. And guess what? Tonight, I want to say no to Naranda. Naranda, go back where you come from and leave our cockpit country. Leave the little part. What we have left after you mine out everywhere. Jamaica, land we love. Jamaica is a peaceful place. Yes, especially in the Alps. Peaceful. You can't let your door open. If you give me the time to preach, me will preach because I love my country. Me love Jamaica. And everybody depending on Jamaica, the entire world. Depending on Jamaica. The tourists love Jamaica. They get the beautiful sunshine. The beautiful sunshine when they come here, they lay down and tan. Yeah, them get the nicest water. And this is in Jamaica. Look here, Mr. Prime Minister. You grieving us. You taking up everything away from us. Fire burn to Daranda. Fire burn to no minding in the Cockpit Country.
I think this is as good a point as any to point out that we invited representatives from the Office of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister was not able to attend. We also asked for him to send a suitable replacement. There was not one provided. And we also invited representatives from the Mines and Geology unit as well. But several points made there, Hugh Dixon. But as the person who founded the Yam Festival in particular, I want to center the issue there on the future of yam farmers. If some of the things that we're talking about were to come to fruition, what would the consequences be for yam farmers in particular in a parish known for, yam?
Well, Archibald and audience, you just heard Ms. Campbell speak very eloquently. The places that she spoke about where yams grow is in cast limestone topography terminology called bottomlands. That's where the hills of the cockpit surround flat areas that we both live and farm on. Bottomlands. For the bauxite interests, those bottomlands are called ore bodies. So the objective is to build haul roads to get access to those bottomlands, or what they call ore bodies, and dig them out. Essentially, all of what Ms. Campbell just spoke about as resources there that are free and those that are commercial, that people go and plant and survive, and the livelihood. And if you look in that corridor of human standard of living is dependent on that. So it's a competing interest. Additionally, and critically additionally, is that if you think of the future, the growing population, and the need to expand our productivity, Special Mining Lease Area 173 represents that increase in agricultural production for Trelawny and St. Anne and Jamaica. So the moment they go in there, and Noranda has the tendency to propagandize that they only want 15% of the landscape. They can only take out 15% of the landscape because the other is hillocks, limestone hillocks on which forest broadleaf trees grow on. So where they are interested in is the productive soil with the biodiversity, with the rare and endemic species, with the tangerine trees, and having the fertile topsoil on top of the ore body that the government and its partner, Noranda, wants to take out and ship to Louisiana to make aluminium and send it around the world as an export and leave us disenfranchised. It is as simple and as straightforward as that. And however many people there are employed in bauxite, particularly here in Noranda, they are protecting something for themselves and their foreign interests that will disenfranchise some 15,000 people who currently live and have historical connections with that space because their monuments are there, their grave sites are there, all of the trails that link Madras to Ulster Spring and Sawyers to Gibraltar are in there. And what they are intending to do is dig that out.
A space for 2 more questions from the floor before we wrap, before we get closing comments and wrap.
Good evening, everyone. I should say I'm very happy for this opportunity to be in such a forum to participate. Okay, my name is Lorna Williams Christie, and I am from, I would say, the core of Cockpit Country. My concern is the new developments in mining, quarrying, or whatever. I heard the minister say that they will not go back on their word on the mining lease for 173, and also that they are thinking of doing limestone quarrying. Now, my concern is, do we really know as a nation the value of Cockpit Country? And I think whatever government is in place, they should really come together and have consultations with the average person within Cockpit Country and find out the value, the real value of Cockpit Country. Because that's the only way we are going to know if we are really benefiting from Cockpit Country or from mining. And as far as I'm concerned, thinking of going down the road of doing limestone quarrying, that means there's not enough bauxite left in Jamaica for them to mine. And I'm saying Jamaica is an island surrounded by the Caribbean Sea. Cockpit Country is made up mainly of limestone rocks. And when you start to quarry limestone, that acts as the strainer for the water that comes down through the Cockpit Country, you're simply telling us that you want us to flood out in the long run. So Jamaica will no longer be, because the Cockpit Country was formed from the constant rainfall over the years that put those holes through to form as a strainer for those waters, the rainfall that comes through, to go down into the aquifers, go down into the rivers, and all of those. When you destroy all of those, what is going to be left to retain all that water? There are many people in Jamaica who still drink the pure spring water. And I don't really see the value as a nation from the bauxite mining. How many persons really benefit? The people in Cockpit Country don't really benefit. We benefit from all of that food that is being generated from that rich soil that they have not destroyed yet. Now Jamaica can sustain itself with food. We export food. We get income from that, from all of those revenues. And all of these, the government should look into, because as the lady said before, the fruit trees, why don't they invest in fruit trees? If they want a proper school feeding program, invest in fruit trees. Give the children natural fruit juices. Invest in all those food, all those ground provisions that children can get nutrients from. Now even the fish in the sea is diminishing, because all the mining, all the oxide that is going down from all of those, that they are digging up, is destroying the entire island. How are we benefiting? It's as if we have no vision. And it says, without a vision, the people will perish. So we are contradicting ourselves. Now the community group that I represent, from time to time we may get grant funding to do reforestation within our forest reserves. We are trying to combat the effects of climate change. But what is the sense we are going to do reforestation when, on the other hand, you have bauxite mining destroying all the trees? It's like it's defeating the purpose, so I just cannot see it. So if the government changes tomorrow morning, government has majority shares in the bauxite companies. So whichever government comes in, they're only going to fool the people that they will not mine. I mean, education, the world is getting smaller. They say if you want to hide anything from black people, you must put it in writing. Not anymore. Because everybody, even the little baby, can scroll their phone. And if they don't understand the point to it and ask you what is that, and you explain it to them to their level so that they can understand. We are no more fools. Everybody is getting wise nowadays. So when they're going to come and tell us that, well, we are getting this from bauxite mining, what are we getting from Cockpit Country? We get rich soil with nutrients that can provide us with food to sustain us. The eldest person in Jamaica the other day was living in my community, 117 years of age. Longevity in Cockpit Country. And if you come in the community, a lot of persons are living 90 and 100 and odd still. Huh? Nowadays, all around the urban islands, as somebody gets sick, they die. Why? Because of all the fertilizer food, all the imported foods. We can sustain ourselves in Jamaica if we think wisely and plan for the country. That is just my take. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more comment. Before I get to that comment, I just want to ask, why can't the both things be achieved, though, for each of the panelists? Why can't you have mining in certain areas and protection of other areas? Why are they inconsistent? Why are those ideas inconsistent? Hugh Dixon first.
27% of Jamaica's island has bauxite deposits, and the last 60 years we have mined out critically, I would easily say about 3/4 of it. It's a non-renewable resource, so it's finishing. It has been finished in St. Catherine, Clarendon, for the most part. St. Anne is finished, and they're now coming over into Trelawny. What's left is in the Cockpit Country, and all the mining leases that are left in the Cockpit Country. We have to decide as a nation, do you take out the very last iota of bauxite and then we start to think about what happens to us after? Or we begin from now, having taken out 3/4 of it and taken it out inefficiently? Because why most of the plants around are closed, they are the most inefficient bauxite entities anywhere in the world. So we are courting inefficiencies, and these companies close as soon as it doesn't suit their bottom line, and they send somebody in to start up again. So we only have about 30 years of bauxite left. And if we mine at the levels that, for example, Noranda wants to mine, they now take out 3.5 million metric tons per year, and they want to begin to take out 5 million metric tons per year. So they want an increase. And they are dying to get special mining lease 173 because they have a train line running beside it, and it's easy to get there and take it out. And if they get out 173, they're coming for my community in Albertown because it's next door. So there is a plan to take out every last iota. And when they have taken it out, they're going for the limestone. The point to all Jamaicans, do you decide to give them the opportunity to take out the rest of it, and then we start what happens to us?
Dr. Smith, same question to you there. Is there a sustainable way? Sustainable development, that's a phrase we hear thrown around a lot. Is there a sustainable way of achieving both, of balancing the two interests?
You can't really sustainably manage a finite resource. So if you're looking at mining, what you do is, if you want to be as sustainable as possible, is you sort of eke it out for as long as you possibly can. However, it's a finite resource, so you can't replace it. The more you use, the less you have. So basically, at some point, we have to come to the point where the country says, well, okay, if all our bauxite is left in a couple of places, well, we've said we're not going to mine Cockpit Country. Well, let's make sure we won't ever do that. And if there are bauxite left in a couple of other places, sure, maybe if those places do not have a high cost to them in terms of mining, then we can mine them. But at some point, we have to face the reality that we will run out of a non-renewable resource. One of the problems that not just Jamaica, but many countries have had is that they don't look to what will come at the end. So we did some work years ago on a small island developing state called Nauru, which basically made money from mining phosphate. It's a tiny island, but it had phosphate. And when it was mining phosphate at the height of its thing, every person living in Nauru got a check for $3,000 a year for not doing anything, for just simply being a citizen. So they were really happy and rich. And then it ran out. Now they're dirt poor. And all those $3,000 checks, well, they spent that when they got them and thought they were rich. So we have to do the same thing. It's a finite resource. It will run out. There will come a day when we can no longer mine. We need to make sure that we don't sacrifice the good for the feeling that we're going to make money. So we need to come to a rational, evidence-based, this is how long it will last and this is what we will do afterwards.
All right. A question from the floor. I believe that's a Jippy Jappa hat, which would make this the Westwood High School for Girls. So, let's hear this comment.
Panel, audience, good evening everyone. As it relates to the environmental effects in mining the Cockpit Country, most of the arguments raised today are in defense of our keynote species. So the question I pose today is, how can we ensure that no keynote species are in these designated mining areas?
The best way to protect the important species, the endemic species, those are the ones that we find only in Jamaica and nowhere else. The rare species and the threatened species is to protect the entire ecosystem. That is, everything that is in a particular area. It's very difficult to say, well, let's just protect this bat or this butterfly or this plant, because all the species are interconnected and it's very difficult to figure out what you'd need to protect. And in any case, sometimes it needs everything. So the answer to your question, if we want to protect the really important species, the Jamaican species, the endemic species, is to protect a large enough amount of the ecosystem so that they will be able to survive. And we also need to bear in mind that there are a few species, trees and so on, which may only grow on the top of 1 or 2 hills. And so obviously for those, we need to protect that hill and all the hills around it for quite some distance. So we need to know where they are, know what they depend on, protect everything first. Maybe later on we might find we don't need all of it, but we definitely need to, from now, protect the entire ecosystem.
Okay, thank you.
Final question.
To the panel, audience, good evening. My name is Marta Frater from Alps. That same spot of ground that bauxite is after. Well, let me borrow the
I think you'll have to lean into the microphone a little bit more. We can't hear you clearly.
Let me borrow the words from the then Dr. Anthony Venge's. Prevention is better than cure. My word this evening is that the Prime Minister of Jamaica do not know most of these areas in Trelawny. So he came with some destructive boundaries and placed them all over. Whosoever him give, he spoke with to put them there. We are saying the boundaries, he do not know the boundaries. He needs to come to Trelawny and find out from we the people who are living there to know about the boundaries. The boundaries are St. Trelawny and St. Anne, Manchester and St. Anne, St. James and St. Anne, and Trelawny and St. Elizabeth. Those are the boundaries. So he's really tricking the people when he came with those boundaries, because all because of the greed of money. I think he needs to look at the people's interests. First, our livelihood, as the bygone speakers have spoken about our livelihood. That's where our life lies. So we are asking, I wish he was here, Prime Minister Holness, to get into himself, to reconsider it, the whole process of mining, that he should desist from all these destructive practices and ease off Naranda Bauxite Company, back off Naranda Bauxite Company, let go Naranda Bauxite Company and hold his people. And those farmland, leave the farmlands alone. Let we the farmers have access to those lands and plant up increased production, which is one of the major production in any countries. So therefore, we are asking Prime Minister Holness to reconsider what he's doing and know that he's going to affect so many lives, different type of lives. I watched talk show, and they are saying that it was this doctor, and they are saying that the water, when bauxite mine, anywhere they went and they mine it, eventually where the flushes off this stream or whatever, it goes into the water stream, and the doctor was saying the end of it, you're ending up with cancer. And you know that once you have cancer, it's death. So mining is death. Mining is a cancer. Mr. Prime Minister Holness must reconsider himself. So my word to him, no mining in the cockpit. No mining in Trelawny. Get out of Trelawny. Get out of Jamaica. He sucked enough from Jamaica. That's my word.
And that's going to have to be our final question or comment from the floor. But as we close, I'm going to ask each of our panelists, starting with you, Dr. Smith, on the other side, where does the advocacy go now? What needs to be done? What needs to be done?
Okay, so the Forest Department is busy trying to find out exactly where on the ground the boundaries are, at least for the boundary for the protected area. That work needs to go on and continue, and the moment that we know where the boundaries are, there needs to be a declaration of, I believe, a national park and also a protected area, but also the development of regulations that explain what it's actually protecting, because without regulations, the protected area doesn't have any meaning. In addition to that, we need to figure out what kinds of management will take place in the transition and the buffer zone. We don't have, at the moment, very good laws that allow for that to take place, so we still need to figure out what we want. We may need to craft laws, but frankly, if you want something to happen anytime soon, the best bet is to try and figure out how to make do with the laws we already have. My experience has been that it takes decades sometimes to write new laws, and that don't make sense. The other thing we should do, and this goes back to the point that the gentleman who said he was 58 years old made about politics and representation. Make sure that your MP knows that if he wishes to remain MP, or if she wishes to remain MP, they must feel the same way you do about the issues that are important to you. So that is something which you have to do. But we also need as well to make sure that the Mining Act is rewritten in such a way that it reflects the values and understanding of a Jamaica that is in the 21st century and wants to achieve all those goals in 2030 that we agreed to in New York and which are part of our development plan.
Yes, I agree with David that the first part of the legislative framework problem is the Mining Act, and the Mining Act needs to go, because no matter what you do in a democratic process, such as the people of Cockpit Country and the people of St. Anne and other places have tried to do, the Mining Act has trumped that, because you don't own your property in reality, because the Crown, in this case the government, owns the minerals, and you only need to be given 2 weeks' notice, and they can come on your land and mine whether you want them to or not. So that is a huge issue. He has pointed out that the legislation changes take decades in this country. So we need to put pressure on politicians and let them know that we will not continue to be divided by tribalism and blind patronage and other irrational behaviors, but that they have to take a stand, and that stand is not just no mining in Cockpit Country, but no mining in Jamaica. It is time for an exit plan. It is time to give no new mining leases, no new prospecting leases. It is time for imaginary for the future, which is not based on ecocide and genocide and has no future for the children who are here right now. It's time for new solutions, but in the immediacy, it's time to not let Special Mining Lease 173 happen. Everyone needs to do whatever it takes to not let that happen. And the question is, since people have been asking Mr. Prime Minister, will you bring out the soldiers? Will you bring out the police to kill your own people when we stand there and demand no mining?
Well, I'd like to continue in the chorus by saying I'd ask the government immediately, and I think we all need to say, please, respectfully, withdraw mining lease 173 immediately. Two is, let us draw on the best minds in the communities, at the university, in the private sector, in Jamaica, to put together an economic plan that speaks to sustainable use of the resources across the island, and in particular in the resources available in the Cockpit Country. And make that be the part of the exit strategy from mining bauxite, which is a non-renewable resource and is going to leave this country in shambles when it is finished. Lastly, I'd like to say, as part of the chorus, look into the eyes of the people who will come to you asking you to vote for them for political representation. If they have no vision, you will see it in their eyes. If they don't have it, challenge them about what is the development plan for this generation and the generations to come that will ensure that the resilience of this nation and its people remain intact and provide prosperity going forward. That is a duty of all of us listening here, all of these students who are looking to the future with your exams, you must call to book those who lead. Start with your school and those who lead the school, and go forward into the community and to the representational politics and to the top man, the Prime Minister. Don't look too much at the color, whether it's orange or green. It's the purpose that they serve. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our panelists this evening. Dr. David Smith from the Sustainable Development Unit at the University of the West Indies Mona campus, filmmaker, writer, and linguist Dr. Esther Figueroa, and the Executive Director of the Southern Trelawny Environmental Agency, Hugh Dixon. A round of applause for them again, please. Remember that the conversation continues online. Use our hashtag Cockpit Debate, PAC Jamaica, and get in your comments and your questions. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, and of course, we're on YouTube. And of course, as well, please share your comments, your questions with the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica, the EFJ. Today's town hall would not have been possible without the support of the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica. Round of applause for them as well. And thank most of all of you for showing up this evening, for making all of this possible. Good evening, I'm Archibald Gordon. Thank you for joining us.